They want me to talk about the war years, about working in the factories, about being a Rosie the Riveter, they call it now, like it was some grand adventure. It wasn't an adventure. It was survival. It was duty. It was doing what had to be done while the world burned. My name is Dorothy Marshall. I'm 63 years old now. Back then, 1942, I was 20. Just a girl, really, living in Detroit with my parents and younger brother, working as a secretary at an insurance office, making $35 a week, living a perfectly ordinary life. Then Pearl Harbor happened. I remember that Sunday, December 7th, 1941. We were having dinner when the radio interrupted the program. The announcer's voice was shaking. Japanese planes had attacked Hawaii, thousands dead. The Pacific Fleet destroyed. My father went quiet. He'd been in the First War, the Great War they called it then. Saw action in France, never talked about it much, but I'd seen the look in his eyes sometimes, the distance. That look came back that Sunday. He knew what was coming. We all did. My brother Tommy enlisted the next day, 18 years old, full of fire and patriotism. Wanted to fight the Japs, make them pay. My mother cried for a week straight. He shipped out in February 1942, Marines, Pacific Theater. We got letters every few weeks, cheerful letters about the weather and the food and his buddies, nothing about what he was actually doing, nothing about what he was seeing. We learned to read between the lines, to hear what he wasn't saying. By spring of 42, everything had changed. Rationing started. Sugar, coffee, gasoline, rubber. They needed everything for the war effort. Every scrap of metal, every ounce of rubber, every gallon of fuel. The posters were everywhere. Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. The men were gone. Millions of them shipped overseas to fight. And the factories, the ones making tanks and planes and ships and ammunition, they needed workers. Desperately. That's when the recruiting started. Posters everywhere. We can do it. A woman in a bandana flexing her arm. Women in war jobs. Victory is in your hands. They needed us. The country needed us. The boys overseas needed us. I didn't think twice. Quit my secretary job and applied at the Willow Run plant. Ford Motor Company had converted it from making cars to making B-24 bombers. They were hiring anyone who could work. Women, old men, anyone who wasn't already in uniform. My mother was horrified. Factory work? That's not proper for a young lady. My father was quiet. Then he said, Tommy's over there fighting. Least we can do is help build what he needs to fight with. That settled it. I started at Willow Run in June 1942. Night shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 6 days a week, $65 a week. Nearly double what I'd made as a secretary. The money wasn't why I did it, though. None of us did it for the money. We did it because our brothers and sons and husbands were dying, because every rivet we drove, every seam we welded, every part we assembled might be the difference between a bomber coming home or going down in flames. We did it because we had to. My first night at Willow Run, I stood at the entrance and looked at that massive building, over 3 million square feet. They called it the Arsenal of Democracy. One B-24 Liberator rolled off the line every 63 minutes at peak production. I was terrified. I'd never done manual labor in my life, never used tools, never worked around heavy machinery. But I walked through those doors anyway, because that's what you did. You didn't ask if you were capable. You didn't worry about whether it was proper or safe or comfortable. You just did what needed to be done, and we did. My first week at Willow Run nearly broke me. They gave us 2 days of training, 2 days to learn riveting, welding, reading blueprints, operating machinery that could kill you if you made a mistake. Then they put us on the line. I was assigned to the fuselage section, installing hydraulic lines, electrical systems, control cables, crawling inside half-built bomber fuselages in the middle of the night, working by flashlight, my hands cramping from gripping tools for hours. The noise was unbelievable. Constant hammering, drilling, riveting, machinery running. You couldn't hear yourself think. We'd shout at each other and barely be heard. By the end of each shift, my ears would be ringing so loud I could barely hear my mother at breakfast. The first night, I made it 3 hours before I had to run outside and throw up. The combination of noise and diesel fumes and exhaustion and fear. I stood there in the parking lot, shaking, certain I couldn't do it. A woman found me. Older, maybe 40. Her name was Rose. She'd been there since the plant opened. First night? She asked. I nodded, wiping my mouth. Yeah, it's rough, but it gets easier. Sort of. She lit a cigarette, offered me one. I didn't smoke, but I took it anyway. You got someone over there? Fighting? My brother, Marines, Pacific. She nodded. My husband, Army, Europe, and my son, Navy. She took a long drag. That's why we're here. That's why we go back in there even when every part of us wants to quit. She was right. I went back in, worked the rest of the shift, came back the next night and the next. By the end of the first month, my hands were covered in cuts and calluses. My back ached constantly. I'd lost 10 pounds because I was too exhausted to eat much. My hair was always tied back in a bandana to keep it out of the machinery. We'd all heard the stories about women who'd been scalped when their hair got caught. But I could drive rivets, could read a blueprint, could install a hydraulic line in the dark by feel alone. I'd become a factory worker. There were thousands of us at Willow Run. Mostly women, but also older men, disabled men, anyone who could work. We came from all over. Farm girls, secretaries, teachers, housewives, different backgrounds, different lives, but we all had the same reason for being there. Someone we loved was over there. Someone we loved needed what we were building. We worked in teams. My team was 6 women. There was Rose, who'd helped me that first night. Betty, a former school teacher from Ohio. Margaret, a farm girl from Iowa. Helen, a widow whose husband had died at Bataan. And Sarah, whose fiancé was a bomber pilot in England. We became family, had to. When you're working 12-hour shifts in dangerous conditions, you depend on each other, watch out for each other, cover for each other when someone's having a bad day. We'd eat lunch together at 2 a.m., sandwiches and coffee in the break room, share letters from home, from overseas, cry together when someone got bad news, celebrate together when someone got good news. Helen got the telegram in July. Her brother had been killed in North Africa. She came to work that night anyway, said she couldn't stay home, couldn't sit still, needed to keep moving, keep working. We all understood work was how we coped, how we felt useful, how we felt like we were fighting back. The production quotas were relentless. They needed more bombers, always more. Every week the targets went up. One B-24 every 63 minutes, then every 55 minutes, then every 50 minutes. Faster, better, more. We'd work until our hands bled, until we could barely stand, until we were running on coffee and determination and nothing else. Because every bomber that rolled off that line meant another crew in the air, another mission, another chance to bring the boys home sooner. The supervisors, mostly men too old for service, would walk the line, pushing us. Come on, ladies, those Nazis won't bomb themselves. Those boys need these planes. As if we needed reminding, as if we weren't already working ourselves to death, but we did it. We met every quota, exceeded most of them. By the end of 1942, I couldn't remember what my life had been like before. The secretary job, the normal hours, the ease of it all. It felt like someone else's life, someone who didn't know what war was, someone who didn't understand what was at stake. I'd see women on the street during the day when I was trying to sleep after a night shift, dressed nicely, shopping, having lunch, and I'd feel angry, resentful. What were they doing for the war effort? Why weren't they in the factories? It wasn't fair, that anger. Everyone contributed in their own way. But when you're exhausted and in pain and haven't seen your family awake in weeks, fairness doesn't matter much. We got letters from Tommy every few weeks, still cheerful, still vague, but we could tell it was getting worse. The sensors would black out more and more. The time between letters would get longer. My mother stopped sleeping much. I'd come home at 6:30 a.m. and find her already up, staring at the radio, waiting for news, dreading the knock on the door, the telegram. Every mother in America was waiting for that knock, dreading it, living in fear of it. That was the home front. Not glamorous, not adventurous, just fear and work and exhaustion and waiting, always waiting. But we kept working, kept building, kept hoping that every bomber we made would bring the war closer to ending, would bring our boys home sooner. That hope was all we had. The accident started in the winter of 1943. When you're running machinery 24 hours a day, when you're pushing exhausted workers to meet impossible quotas, when you're training people in 2 days to operate equipment that should take months to master, accidents happen. They just do. The first one I witnessed was in January. A woman named Patricia, I didn't know her well, she worked in a different section, got her sleeve caught in a lathe. It pulled her arm in before anyone could hit the emergency stop. The screaming, God, the screaming. They rushed her to the medical station, but we all knew. We'd all heard the sound of bone breaking, of flesh tearing. She lost the arm below the elbow. She was 23 years old, had a 2-year-old daughter at home. Production stopped for 20 minutes while they cleaned up. Then we went back to work. What else could we do? The quotas didn't change because someone got hurt. The war didn't stop. The boys overseas still needed bombers. So we kept working. But after that, every time I reached near machinery, I'd hesitate. Every time I heard a scream, and you'd hear them over the noise, the sudden sharp cry, my stomach would drop. In February, a woman fell from scaffolding, 30 feet onto concrete, died instantly. In March, an explosion in the paint section, chemical fire, 3 women badly burned. 1 died later at the hospital. In April, a riveting gun malfunctioned, sent a rivet through a woman's hand, pinned it to the metal she was working on. She had to wait for someone to cut her free. That rivet through her palm the whole time. They didn't report these accidents in the newspapers, didn't want to hurt morale. Didn't want people to know the price we were paying at home. But we knew. Every woman in every factory knew. We lived with that fear every shift. Knew that one moment of exhaustion, one distraction, one mechanical failure could maim or kill us. And we came back anyway. The exhaustion was the worst part, not the danger. You could be careful, follow safety procedures. But the exhaustion, you couldn't fight that. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Some women were working even more, picking up extra shifts when they could. We were running on 4 or 5 hours of sleep a day, some less. You'd see women fall asleep standing up, literally asleep on their feet, swaying until someone shook them awake. You'd see them miss steps, fumble tools, make mistakes that could cost lives, the lives of the air crews who'd fly the planes we were building. That guilt was crushing. Every rivet you drove wrong, every seam that wasn't perfect, every time your exhausted brain made a mistake. You'd think about the men who'd be flying that bomber, about whether your mistake would be the one that made it fail, that made it fall from the sky. We had inspectors, of course, quality control, but they couldn't catch everything, and they were just as exhausted as we were. Sarah, the woman whose fiancé was a bomber pilot, she had a breakdown in March, just collapsed on the line, sobbing, couldn't stop. They had to carry her to the medical station. She'd gotten a letter that morning. Her fiancé's plane had been shot down over Germany. He was missing, presumed dead. She'd come to work anyway, tried to keep going. Lasted 6 hours before she broke. They sent her home. She never came back. Heard later she'd been hospitalized. Nervous breakdown, they called it. But she wasn't the only one. Women would just stop coming, disappear from the line. Sometimes you'd hear why, injury, illness, breakdown. Sometimes you'd never know. And new women would replace them, fresh faces, eager at first, then exhausted, then broken. The turnover was constant. My mother started working in April 1943. She'd held out for over a year trying to maintain the home, but we needed the money. My father's salary wasn't enough with rationing and inflation. She got a job at a different plant, making ammunition. Day shift, so we'd pass each other, me coming home as she left. We'd barely see each other, exchange a few words, try to share what little news we had. She aged 10 years and 6 months. The work destroyed her. Her hands became gnarled and painful. Her back gave out. But she kept going. We all kept going. The letters from Tommy got worse, more censored, more time between them. When they came, they were shorter, less cheerful. You could feel the weight in them, even through the careful words. He'd been at Guadalcanal, then Tarawa, then Saipan. Every battle worse than the last. Every letter making it clearer that he was seeing things, doing things that were changing him. I'm fine, he'd write. Don't worry about me. But we did worry. Constantly. Every day without a letter was agony. Every day with a letter was relief followed by dread. Relief he was alive. Dread at what he wasn't saying. The newsreels showed the war, the victories, the bombers over Germany, the Marines taking islands. They played patriotic music and showed smiling soldiers and made it all look noble, necessary, winnable. We'd watch those newsreels and think about the bombers we built, about whether that one on the screen was one we made, about whether the boys inside it made it home, about whether our brothers and sons and husbands were in those battles they showed in quick cuts and dramatic narration. The disconnect between the propaganda and the reality was crushing. They showed us as heroes, Rosie the Riveter, strong and smiling, doing our part with pride and joy. They didn't show the accidents, the exhaustion, the fear, the women who broke down crying in the bathroom because they'd just gotten a telegram, the mothers who kept working even after their sons died because stopping would mean facing it. They didn't show the truth. In June 1943, a woman on my line, Betty, the former school teacher, got a telegram at work. They let her read it in the supervisor's office. Her son had been killed in Italy, 20 years old. She came back to the line 30 minutes later, red-eyed, shaking, and kept working. He'd want me to finish the shift, she said. We all cried with her, took turns hugging her during breaks, but we kept working too, because that's what you did. You carried your grief and fear and pain, and you kept building bombers, kept driving rivets, kept feeding the machine. The war didn't stop for our grief, so neither could we. By the summer of 1943, I'd been at Willow Run for over a year. I couldn't remember what it felt like to not be exhausted, to not have my hands hurt, to not wake up every day dreading telegrams and newsreels and the sound of machinery. I was 21 years old and I felt ancient, but I kept going. We all did, because somewhere out there, Tommy was still fighting. And as long as he was fighting, I could keep building. Had to keep building, even if it was killing me. 1944 was the longest year of my life. The war seemed endless by then. We'd been at it for over 2 years. Every day the same. Work, sleep, work, sleep. The seasons changed, but nothing else did. Just the constant grind of production, the constant fear, the constant waiting for news. Tommy was still alive, still writing. But the letters had changed. The censors blacked out more. The words that got through were empty, like he was writing from somewhere far away, like part of him had already gone somewhere we couldn't reach. He'd been at Peleliu in September, one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific. We didn't know that then, just knew from his letters that something had happened, something bad. I'm okay, he wrote, don't worry. But there was a tremor in his handwriting that hadn't been there before. The factory had become my entire world. I couldn't remember what I used to do with my time. Couldn't remember what it felt like to have energy, to not hurt constantly, to not hear the machinery even in my sleep. Rose left in March. Her husband had been killed in France. She lasted 2 weeks after the telegram, then just stopped coming. Heard she'd moved back to Missouri to live with her sister. Margaret collapsed from exhaustion in May. They took her out on a stretcher. She didn't come back either. Helen's health failed. Years of grief and overwork caught up with her. Last I heard, she was in a sanatorium. One by one, my team was disappearing, replaced by new women who'd last a few months before they broke too. The work had become mechanical, automatic. My hands knew what to do without thinking. Drive rivet, move to next position. Drive rivet, check seam, move on, hour after hour, night after night. I stopped feeling much of anything. Couldn't afford to. Feeling meant breaking, and I couldn't break. Not yet. Not while Tommy was still over there. Not while the war was still going. So I became a machine, just like the ones around me, functioning but not alive, processing but not thinking, moving but not feeling. My mother was worse. The ammunition work had destroyed her hands. Arthritis, they said, nerve damage from the chemicals. She could barely hold a cup by the end of her shifts, but she kept working. We'd see each other maybe an hour a day, both too exhausted to talk much. Just sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, staring at nothing. My father had that look in his eyes all the time now, the distance, the haunted expression from his war, except now he was watching his wife and daughter kill themselves slowly while his son fought overseas. He couldn't do anything about any of it. That helplessness was eating him alive. The neighbor's son came home in June. He'd lost both legs in Normandy. They had a welcome home party, tried to make it celebratory, but everyone could see the dead look in his eyes, could see how his mother cried while trying to smile. War came home with him. Not the noble sacrifice of the newsreels, just a broken boy who'd never walk again. We were building more bombers than ever. The production numbers were staggering. Thousands of aircraft rolling off lines across the country, enough firepower to flatten cities, which is exactly what we were doing, flattening German cities, Japanese cities. I'd see the newsreels of the bombing campaigns, watch cities burn, and think about the bombers we built, about whether ours were the ones dropping those bombs, about the people underneath. They were the enemy. They'd started it. They had to be stopped. That's what we told ourselves, what we had to believe. But late at night, in those moments between shifts, I'd think about the women in those cities. Were they working in factories too? Were they exhausted and scared and waiting for telegrams? Were they losing sons and brothers and husbands? Were we really so different? Those thoughts were dangerous, unpatriotic. You couldn't think like that and keep going, so I buried them, pushed them down, focused on Tommy, on our boys, on bringing them home. The rest couldn't matter. In August, a new woman joined our section. Couldn't have been more than 18. Bright-eyed, enthusiastic. Reminded me of myself 2 years ago. "How long have you been here?" she asked me one night. 2 years, I said, and she looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw it in her eyes, the shock. I was 22 but looked 40, thin, exhausted, with gray starting in my hair, hands scarred and gnarled, eyes dead. "Oh," she said quietly. I wondered if she'd last 2 months. Most didn't anymore. The turnover was even worse now. Women would work a few weeks and realize what it was costing them, what it was doing to them, and they'd leave. But most of us couldn't leave. We had people depending on us, people overseas who needed what we were building, bills to pay, families to support. So we stayed and we broke, slowly, piece by piece. By the fall of 1944, we'd been at war for 3 years. 3 years of rationing and fear and death and work. 3 years of telegrams and casualty lists and gold stars and windows. The news said we were winning, that Germany was faltering, that Japan was being pushed back, that the end was in sight. But we'd been hearing that for years. Just a little longer, just a little more. One more push and it'll be over. It was never over. The work continued, the quotas continued, the fear continued, and we continued because what choice did we have? I was 22 years old. I'd spent 2.5 years building instruments of death. My hands had helped create bombers that had killed thousands, maybe tens of thousands. for the greater good, to end the war, to bring the boys home. And that's what we told ourselves, had to tell ourselves. Because if it didn't mean something, if all this suffering and sacrifice and death didn't mean something, then what was the point? What was any of it for? November 14th, 1944. I remember the date exactly because that's the day everything stopped meaning anything. I was on my usual shift, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was cold, Detroit winter setting in. The factory was never warm, but you learned to ignore it, learned to ignore everything except the work. Around midnight, the foreman came to my station. His face was wrong, too careful, too gentle. "Dorothy," he said, "come with me." I knew. Immediately, I knew. "No," I said, still holding my rivet gun. "No, I need to finish this section." "Dorothy, I need to finish this section. This bomber needs to be done. The boys need—" "Your mother's in the office," he said quietly. "There's been a telegram." The rivet gun fell from my hands, hit the floor with a clang that I barely heard. The walk to the office was the longest of my life. I could see my mother through the window, sitting in a chair, holding a piece of paper, staring at nothing. I knew what that paper said before I even opened the door. "Tommy." The telegram was brief, impersonal. "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Private Thomas Marshall, was killed in action on November 10th in the Philippine Islands." Killed in action. 4 days ago. He'd been dead for 4 days and we didn't know. Had been going about our lives, going to work, eating meals, sleeping, while he was already gone. My mother wasn't crying. She was beyond crying. Just sitting there, holding that paper, her face empty. I should have cried, should have screamed, should have felt something, but I felt nothing, just nothing. And they sent us home. The factory had a policy. Immediate family could take 3 days after a death notification, 3 days to bury your grief and get back to work. We went home. My father was already there. Someone had called him. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and when he saw us, he stood up, looked at my mother, at me, and I saw his face crumble. He'd survived the trenches of France, had buried friends, had seen horrors that gave him nightmares for decades. But this, his son, this broke him. He made a sound I'd never heard before. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. Just this broken animal noise. And then he was on the floor, and my mother was holding him, and they were both crying. I stood in the doorway and felt nothing. 3 days. They gave us 3 days. The funeral was small. Most people were working or couldn't get enough gas rations to travel. We buried an empty casket. Tommy's body was still in the Philippines, would probably stay there. Most of them did. At least he died for something, someone said at the service. At least it meant something. I wanted to scream at them, wanted to ask what it meant. What did 8 square miles of volcanic rock mean? What did a Manila street corner mean? What meaning was there in a 20-year-old boy dying thousands of miles from home? But I said nothing, just stood there in my black dress, dry-eyed, empty. The 3 days ended. I went back to work. Everyone was kind, careful around me. "I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a hero. We're all so proud of him." I nodded, said thank you, went to my station, and I couldn't do it. Stood there with my rivet gun, looking at the bomber fuselage, and I couldn't make myself start, couldn't make myself care. What was the point? We built bombers. We built thousands of bombers, and boys still died. Tommy had died. And for what? So we could build more bombers, so more boys could die? Where did it end? When did it end? "You okay?" one of the women asked. New girl. Didn't know her name. "Fine," I said automatically. I picked up the rivet gun, put it against the metal, pulled the trigger. The rivet went in wrong, crooked. I could see it immediately. A mistake that would need to be drilled out and redone. I didn't care. Did another one also wrong, and another, and another. Sabotage. That's what it was. Deliberately bad work. They could fire me for it, maybe even prosecute me. I didn't care about that either. A supervisor noticed, came over, looked at my work. "Marshall, what the hell is this?" I looked at him. "My brother's dead." "I know, I'm sorry. But this work..." My brother's dead, I repeated. And I've been building bombers for 2.5 years, and he's still dead. So what's the point? The point is, we're winning. The point is, boys are dying, I was shouting now. People were staring. The point is, we build and they die, and we build more and they die more, and it never stops. It never fucking stops. I'd never sworn before, not once in my life, but something had broken loose. I've worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for 2.5 years. I've watched women die in accidents. I've watched them break down. I've watched them age 20 years and 20 months. I've destroyed my health, my hands, my life, and my brother is still dead. My mother is dying inside. My father can't sleep. And for what? For what? Security was coming. I could see them moving through the plant. We're supposed to be winning. That's what they tell us. The war's almost over, just a little longer, but it's not over. It's never over. And even when it ends, even when we win, Tommy's still dead. All those boys are still dead. And we're still broken. All of us. Broken. They grabbed my arms, started pulling me away from the line. I can't do this anymore, I was saying, crying now, finally crying. I can't. They took me to the medical office, gave me something to calm down, called my mother to come get me. I didn't go back, couldn't. The thought of that factory, that machinery, that endless production, I couldn't face it. They classified it as a breakdown, nervous exhaustion, added me to the list of women who'd broken under the weight. My mother quit too. Her hands were too damaged anyway. We sat at home together, two broken women, waiting for my father to come home from his job at the rail yard, waiting for the war to end, waiting for time to make it hurt less. It didn't. Tommy was gone, and with him went the reason I'd been able to keep going, the purpose that had sustained me through 2.5 years of hell. Without that purpose, I was just empty, hollowed out, used up, 22 years old and completely empty. The war ended eventually, 8 months later. Germany in May, Japan in August. Everyone celebrated, parades, parties, victory. I stayed home, couldn't face the celebrations, couldn't pretend that victory meant anything when Tommy wasn't there to see it. We'd won, but we'd lost too, and no amount of victory could change that. 40 years later, and they want to call us heroes. They make movies about us now. Rosie, the Riveter, the women who built America's arsenal, the greatest generation. They paint it all in patriotic colors, play stirring music, show women in bandanas smiling as they drive rivets. They don't show what it cost us. After the war ended, we were expected to just go back to being wives and mothers and secretaries, give our jobs to the returning men, go back to the kitchen, to the home, to the life we'd had before, as if we could, as if you could spend years doing that kind of work, seeing that kind of suffering, carrying that kind of weight, and then just forget it, just become who you were before. I tried, God knows I tried. I got married in 1947. Nice man, veteran. He'd been in Europe. We understood each other in ways we could never explain to anyone else. We both carried ghosts. We never talked about the war. Not really. He didn't talk about France, and I didn't talk about the factory. We just existed together, two broken people trying to build something normal. We had children, 2 daughters. I stayed home with them, kept house, did all the things a proper wife and mother was supposed to do. But my hands never recovered. The damage from those years, the repetitive strain, the cuts that never quite healed right, the arthritis that set in early. By the time I was 30, my hands ached constantly. By 40, I could barely open jars. Small price, they'd say, compared to what the boys paid. But it was my price, and I paid it every day. My mother never recovered either. The chemical damage to her hands, to her lungs from the fumes, it killed her slowly. She died in 1959, 62 years old. The doctors said it was cancer, but I knew better. The factory had killed her. Just took 15 years to finish the job. My father lived until 1973, but he was never the same after Tommy died. That light in his eyes, the part that had survived the trenches of France, It went out in November 1944. He went through the motions of living, but he wasn't really there anymore. Both my parents died from the war, just not quickly enough to make the casualty lists. I see these reunions now, the factory workers getting together, sharing memories, talking about the good times. They laugh about the long hours, the rationing, the sacrifices. They're proud of what we did. I can't go to those reunions, can't pretend it was some grand adventure, can't smile and reminisce about the time that destroyed me, because that's what it was, destruction. Slow, grinding destruction of everything I might have been. I was 20 when I started at Willow Run. I had dreams, wanted to be a teacher, maybe, wanted to travel, see the world, have adventures, wanted to fall in love properly, get married when I was ready, have children when I wanted them. The war took all of that, took my youth, my health, my brother, my dreams, turned me into a machine. And when the war ended, when they didn't need the machine anymore, they just discarded me. U.S., all of us, go home, be quiet, let the men have their jobs back. And we did, because that's what you did. You didn't complain. You didn't ask for recognition. You'd done your duty, and now you went back to your place. The nightmares never stopped. Different from the boys' nightmares. I wasn't dodging bullets, wasn't watching friends die in combat, but I was in that factory, hearing the machinery, watching Patricia's arm get pulled into the lathe, seeing Betty come back to work after her son died, feeling the exhaustion that never ended. And always, always, I'm holding that telegram, reading those words, killed in action, over and over, every night for 40 years. My husband understood. He had his own nightmares. We'd wake each other up, hold each other, say nothing. What was there to say? The war was over, but it never ended. Not for us. My daughters don't understand. How could they? They grew up in peacetime, in prosperity. The war was just history to them, something in textbooks. They know Uncle Tommy died, but he's just a name, a photograph, a story. They don't know what it was like to live in that constant fear, to work until your body gave out, to watch your mother age 20 years in 3, to lose the person you were and never get them back. I'm 63 years old now, retired, living alone. My husband died 5 years ago, heart attack. The VA said his wartime stress probably contributed. Another casualty, just took 40 years. I watch the news sometimes, see stories about women in the workplace, about equality, about breaking barriers, and I think about us, the women who worked those factories, the women who proved we could do it, who held the country together while the men were gone. And then they told us to forget, to go home, to pretend it never happened. They're talking about feminism now, women's liberation, as if we didn't liberate ourselves in 1942, as if we didn't prove our worth in those factories, as if we didn't sacrifice everything. But nobody remembers that part. They remember Rosie the Riveter, the poster, the symbol. They don't remember the real women, the ones who died in accidents, the ones who broke down, the ones who lost sons and brothers and husbands and kept working anyway, the ones who gave everything and got nothing in return except damaged hands and nightmares. They want me to be proud, to celebrate what we did, to feel like a hero. I can't. I'm proud we won. Proud we stopped Hitler, stopped Japan. Proud the boys came home, most of them anyway. But I can't celebrate what it cost. Can't pretend it was worth it when Tommy's still dead, when my mother died from chemical exposure, when my father died of a broken heart, when I lost my youth, my health, my dreams, when I lost who I was and became this hollowed out thing. Someone asked me once if I'd do it again. If I had to go back, knowing what I know now, would I still go to that factory? I said yes. Because what choice did I have? The country needed us. The boys needed us. You don't say no when your country's at war, but God, I wish I could have said no. Wish I could have kept some part of myself. Wish the war hadn't taken everything. They call us the greatest generation. Say we saved the world. Maybe we did. But we lost ourselves doing it. And nobody talks about that. Nobody wants to hear about the cost, They want the heroic story, the patriotic narrative, the triumph. They don't want to hear about the broken women who came home when the war ended, or tried to come home, tried to be who they were before, and couldn't. They don't want to hear that we never really came home at all. Part of me is still in that factory, still 22 years old, standing at my station, holding that telegram, still breaking, still dying inside, still building bombers while my brother lies dead in the Philippines, still sacrificing everything and losing anyway. That's the truth they don't put in the movies. That's the story they don't tell when they celebrate Rosie the Riveter. We did our duty, we served our country, we won the war, and we lost ourselves, every single one of us. The war ended in 1945, but for us, for the women who worked those factories, who carried that weight, who buried those dreams, the war never ended. It just moved inside us, became part of us, turned us into something we weren't meant to be. We never came home. We're all still there, still working, still breaking, still losing, always losing. And that's what war does, not just to the soldiers, to everyone, to the mothers and wives and daughters, to the workers and the waiters and the ones left behind. It takes everything, gives back nothing, and expects you to smile and be grateful. 40 years later, and I'm still paying the price, still carrying Tommy, still hearing the machinery, still feeling the weight of it all. They want to celebrate us now, want to honor our sacrifice, but you can't honor what you don't understand, and they don't understand. They never will.